Thanks everyone for checking in with us again this week. We are very happy to have everybody with us today. We have an outstanding group ready to talk with you guys again today. Our topic today, we're going to talk a little bit about Michael Irvin's situation. We feel like there has been a lot going on with that, and I want to get my guys' take on Michael Irvin and his situation with the accusal of him either saying something inappropriately, doing something inappropriately at a hotel. So we're gonna get started with that. Greg, why don't you get started with this, man? Tell me what you know about the whole Michael Irvin situation.
Well, I only know what's been reported out there in the media, and what's interesting, I guess, about all of this is that it's Super Bowl week when all this supposedly happened, and Michael Irvin has, been involved in the media for quite some time after a great professional football career, and now we have a young lady accusing him first of doing something inappropriate, and his response was, wait a minute, I only interacted with this individual for maybe a minute and a half, and I don't remember everything that happened. And then now they're saying that, well, maybe he said something inappropriate. And I think it was in reference to her having intercourse with an African American or a black man. And so the whole thing, stinks, I think, from the perspective that now you have Michael Irvin, who didn't seemingly do anything because the video's been leaked now, lost an opportunity to report Super Bowl week, make money, his reputation tarnished, and all those kinds of things. And it just ain't right that a person can just be accused of something and have a whole bunch of loss. And now he's turning the tables and saying, I want to sue not only her, but I want to sue this hotel chain because they made him leave the hotel just on her word. And now Michael Irvin, this Hall of Fame football player and football career, has had this damage happen to him. And you initially just want to get upset and wonder, why does this kind of stuff happen to us all the time, and why do we just get accused and people believe the accuser just because they're either a woman or in some cases a woman and Caucasian. So there are a lot of factors here. But there's one factor I think that hasn't been considered that probably plays into this more than anything. Man, 25 years ago, Michael Irvin was in a hotel with a bunch of women and drugs and dope and getting high and all kind of stuff. And let's not forget, when he was accused, he made the biggest, dumbest decision in the world to show up in court being accused of drugs and all that in a mink coat and sunglasses, like flaunting at the court system. Now, I'm not saying that it's right that Michael Irvin is getting accused and going to suffer loss, but this is why we always tell our kids, or we always try to tell people, man, when you do stupid stuff, it will come back to bite you in the ass later. And guess what? The big chunk came out of Michael Irvin's ass this last week. And frankly, it's because of past behaviors. Now, 5 years ago, in that case, he wouldn't have been a target this time. So he may very well be a target, and I'm not saying it's right. And I hope he does sue the pants off of them and win. But let's face it, Mike, you bought this on yourself, bro. You bought it on yourself.
Wow. I don't know, man. I don't feel like your past discretions or apparent discretions really speak to this. If anything, I feel like that lifestyle that he used to live, that he's capable of living now, kind of speaks to the fact that you don't really have to take it. You don't have to really force it on somebody. When just listening to what was said by the other people that were witnesses, which the Marriott didn't have any discussion with, which ESPN, or the NFL Network, or whoever told him that he had to step down, they didn't have discussions with other people that were there that were witnesses to the whole situation. And what they said was that he was in clear state of mind. They offered to buy him a drink. He refused because he said he had to get up early to go to work. They wanted to take a picture, but he said, let's take it outside. So I'm not taking this picture at the bar. So he's clearly aware of how things look, his persona, and how things can go badly in these type of situations. So it's hard for me to believe that he would go from saying that, take the next step, and ask this lady what she thinks about having sex with a black man. And as a matter of fact, she also said that he seemed intoxicated, which is completely contrary to what those other witnesses said. And it's completely contrary to the video. He doesn't seem to be stammering or stumbling or anything of that nature. I know that's kind of hard to see just from a video, but there's a lot about that video that just says this is not correct. I think, though, even though you have to take some of it serious, I think where is the point that we have to take things so seriously that this man's, ability to make money is affected just from an accusation, And what is the deterrent for women who are like that, who would take that chance to be able to take that chance? Does she just get away scot-free from this and just say, oh, I can make this accusation, cause this man a lot of money, and then she can just walk away into the sunset and maybe try it again later on with somebody else? Like, there has to be some type of deterrent, because I believe in this society, people are willing to do that. You can't rely on the good graces of people to protect you anymore. There has to be some type of legislation or laws that are protecting people and discouraging people from doing this type of thing. Because not only is it bad for them, it's bad for victims, and they're looking suspicious later on.
Let me ask you this then. Do you think that if the same charges that could happen to the accused could happen to the accuser if they're found to be out and out lying, and do you think that would fly, that kind of legislation could happen?
It's now the flip side of that is very hard to prove, and people don't want to, because they don't want to discourage victims from coming out and saying something, because it's hard enough to do that anyway. And so that's kind of a little, frowned upon. But there has to be, just like there are men that lie, there are women that lie. We all know that. Like, we can go back in history. History's filled with people making false accusations about rape. And so when I hear statements like, we should always believe women, no, the hell we should not. Like, that is just as sexist as anything else you could say, because it's anti-women to say that, because there are women of every ilk, of every frame of mind, just like there are men the same way. To say that, you're saying that women, you're putting a real big distinction between men and women. I just feel like stuff like this, when you have a hoax or you have these accusations that are unverified and just seem out of the blue, man, there has to be some way to discourage this, and maybe we got to put our minds together to figure it out.
Yeah. Don?
Yeah, I think you guys are saying a lot. There's a lot.
Hey, Don, I'm sorry. We got like 2 minutes left. You want to start your point over? Or
Don might be able to get his point out in the next two some. So let's just see, and then we go.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to unpack. You guys have said a lot of stuff. I mean, especially when you talk about the history of accusations against men, because we're currently in what we call the Me Too era now, right? But the Me Too era, to me, is, to be honest with you, man, the Me Too era is really an era in which, even before in the history, it's always been the black man that people can always accuse them of saying something. I mean, I'm talking from a historical perspective. Maybe because I just watched the movie Rosewood again of rape when it actually did not happen. Also, Emmett Till. I mean, Michael Irving even brought it up himself in his testimony.
Because in this great country, this takes me back to a time where a white man would accuse a white woman would accuse a black man of something, and they would take a bunch of guys that were above the law, run in the barn, put a rope around his foot, and drag him through the mud and hang him by the tree.
So it's a lot of racial overtones, but from a historical perspective, and in conjunction with the Me Too movement today, I mean, this topic, is pretty deep. So when you say, Chuck, about holding women accountable for these actions, you remember that USC player, that football player that in high school, he was
Banks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was a big time recruit, and all of a sudden he was falsely accused for rape. Fortunately, he was able to get the woman to recant and get it on camera.
Years later, though, he spent time in prison.
He spent time in prison and lost his football career, and miraculously, I mean, thankfully, he did get another opportunity.
So Don, let me ask you this then. Due process. I know we talked a little bit last week when we were talking about the young man, from Alabama and his situation, Brandon Miller. Do you think that even with this, that too often when it comes to us, we're not given our due process before penalties are handed down?
Well, that's like I said, that's always been the case from just look at from a historical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We have not gotten our due process. I mean, because we always, presume guilty, which it should be the other way around. You should be, you have to prove someone's guilt.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just accuse someone without the evidence, without getting his due process. So I think, you put these prejudgments on people. Now look what it's done to Michael Irving. That's why he's suing. Because I mean, it's all in the news, and the way social media is nowadays is everybody, is just painting you with that picture of guilt already. Especially when the people that you work for, set you down or kick you out of the Super Bowl entirely, and that's broadcasted everywhere. So it's making it look like he must have done something.
Yeah.
To your question, absolutely. I think that sometimes we make these judgments too soon without a person getting their due process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
G, what you got?
And I just want to make it clear, you guys. I know earlier I pointed out that Michael Irving has had a history that has led to him being a target. That I'm in no way saying that he shouldn't get his due process, that he probably did anything. As a matter of fact, I think Chuck did a good job of laying out the evidence that's been collected that it's highly likely that Michael Irving did not do anything, that he wasn't intoxicated. He probably didn't make the remarks. We can't say 100% sure. Hopefully they'll.
Well, he did admit that he was, Greg, just real quick, he did admit to being intoxicated.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
Yeah.
We won't know for sure whether or not he made the comment that the young lady said he made, but I do believe that there's always that part where we tell our kids or our people we're mentoring that the thing is not to put yourself in a position or sometimes when you have a prior bad act or you act foolish or you act dumb, even though you might not be that person anymore, there's still some consequences for your prior actions. And so I think for me, the story that is here for us to learn from and for other young Black males to learn from is that sometimes when you make mistakes, when you make bad choices and decisions, there's repercussions even later on in life. So if we can do a better job of just not putting ourselves in that position in the first place, no one's perfect. No one makes the best decisions all the time. But as much as I hope that Michael Irving's vindicated, again, like I said, I hope he sues the pants off the hotel. And if this lady was making this story up, Charles, I agree with you. There should be some repercussions that she should have to suffer from. And it is high time that we make sure that when we're discussing the law and how people, what their results are in the justice system, are levied equally. You know, that people who look like us have that same outcomes as people who don't look like us. So if someone falsely accuses us and we lose income because of it, we lose reputation because of it, and, you know, harm could come to us, that there's some, you know, penalties on that side. But I do want to reiterate that, you know, if Michael Irving didn't have this history, he wouldn't have been the target. He wouldn't have been the one who had to suffer. Doesn't make it right. So I want to be clear. I'm not saying it makes it right. I'm just saying, if I'm looking at, when I'm sitting down talking to my son, what I'm going to tell him is that the reason Michael Irving is probably the target of this is because of what happened 25 years ago. And had he not gotten himself in that situation, he probably wouldn't necessarily be a target. This one now, it could still been a false accusation, you know, but the fact that he had the history is probably what made it possible for it to happen. So that's the message I want my son to get out of it too, is that, you know, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be accused by having made dumb decisions in the past. But at this juncture, you know, if I see Michael Irving, though, you know, I'm gonna chop it up with him and say, Mike, man, why'd that lady do that to you? Because it didn't look like you was out there tripping and doing nothing, you know. And the fact that he didn't get a chance to commentate at the Super Bowl and do all of those good things, that's a huge loss. And somebody, you know, if they're making this story up, should have to pay for that.
Right,
Yeah,
I totally agree.
I agree. And I hear what you're saying, because I feel like we, as adult Black men growing up here, we have to fight this battle. All of us with sons, we have to fight this battle on two fronts. So part of it is you're telling your sons, hey man, when you get pulled over by the cops, 10 and 2. Yes,
Yep.
sir, no, sir. You know, hey, top of the morning to you, officer. You know, like, hey, you have to be
Come over live.
extra out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to get pulled out that car. And if they ask you to get out the car, do what they ask you to do. The flip side of that is we're not gonna not hold law enforcement responsible for treating us like American
Sue him when we get home.
You know?
When we
So
come
we
over
had
live,
that.
go get that lawyer.
We got to fight that on both sides. So yeah, man, you don't want your name to come up in the stuff that, you know, the Cowboys were doing back at the White House back in the day, right?
Yeah.
But still, like, you know, our history, as Don brought up, as a country, man, is notorious. And I was sharing this with Troy, man. I looked up my dad, our last name, and a guy named Sam Mincy was on there, and he was it was a guy from like 1900 or something like that, facing the death penalty. Then I looked up the death penalty, and it was the Georgia death penalty, and it had him by, in one column it had the race. So it was just black male, black male, black male, black male, black male, white male, white male, black male, black male, black male, black. These are people in the electric chair in Georgia. And it went on for that for decades, where it was just overwhelmingly Black men were getting the juice in the electric chair in Georgia, man. And then you look at it, when it hits around 2001, it flips and it starts to mimic the population, you know, which makes more sense. But that's not until you get other Black people in prosecutors and that type thing. So the history of this
And
country
on the juries.
has been, and look, trip off of this, a lot of those were for rape, right? And that's what blew me away. A lot of that was for rape. And I'm gonna read some to you, and it comes from a death penalty info. It says, historically, the use of the death penalty for rape has been a Southern phenomenon that has been applied overwhelmingly against Black defendants, and overwhelmingly in cases involving charges of raping a white woman or child. Says DPIC, which is a website this comes from, is not aware of any cases in the United States in which a white man has been executed for raping but not killing a Black woman or child. While the rape of a white woman was a capital offense in all the slave states, no whites convicted of rape are known to have been executed under these statutes. That right there says a lot, man, of how just the fear of Black men and women and sexuality is just blown the mind of people, particularly, I guess, white men in that case. So when it comes to these cases, these are the residuals that we're getting. And for us not to be cognizant of that, I think is a mistake. And for us to just sweep it under the rug and say, it's not really about that, I think it's a mistake also. And I talked to, there's a friend of mine who is an older white guy, and he's, conservative, and, he believes, he just sees people the same, but he really doesn't, and part of what he was saying, oh, well, we've gotten past that. And no, we haven't gotten past that, man. Like, these things still come up on a regular basis.
All right. Yeah, Chuck, man, I have to agree. I mean, we have not, if you really I think what you said is very key, understanding the history of these types of events. I think if people, I have a real close white friend, and we're the best of friends, but we defer on the history of America. Like, he feels like we should forget about all the racial stuff that went on in the past, because all he's saying is doing is exciting people up and making people angry and unforgiving. And I said that's not true. And and we both Christians, right? And we try to use the Bible as as the basis of our conversation. But as my point is, you can never forget the history. You forgive the history, but you can never forget the history. And I think as soon as you start to forget about the history, history starts to repeat itself, because it's an evil thing within inside people's hearts. It's a spiritual thing. Those spirits are still there. They're not going anywhere. Unless you completely renounce it as soon as it comes up. And I think when we're in denial of our history, that's when history starts to repeat itself. So solution is, you have to acknowledge the history, because once you acknowledge the history of something, then that's when the evil part can be killed and be recognized and be destroyed. But the problem is, nowadays we're trying to deny our history, so it's coming back up. I don't know. Hopefully that's making sense. That's resonating. But that's exactly how I feel. And I think it's, a lot of people got on Michael Irving's case when he mentioned, being lynched. It was like people just up and roar. You have no idea what he's. But what Michael Irving said was true. If you can falsely accuse somebody, like that nowadays,
yeah.
And get away with it, what do you think is going to happen? He might not be lynched.
Character lynching.
Right. Character, his career, his financial future, all could be destroyed just because of a false accusation. And that stuff has been happening for generations and generations and generations. And it's happening still to this day. We got evidence of it. And I think we need to learn from that history. And yeah, you're right. Some people, you don't have to. Everything that doesn't have to be a racial issue, but you have to. But I think if you understand the history behind it, you can see why Black people are feeling that way, and how it can come to a logical conclusion that there is a racial element in the situation.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you got to balance this out too, because I think there's a couple of things at play here. One, was he accused with the heightened sensitivity that, hey, I'm a Caucasian woman, it's a Black man, people will believe me, and history shows that that's true. So there's one thing. And I think also at the same time, when you show the clap back, where Michael Irving has decided to sue this individual for defamation of character, could move to a degree where it's being shown now that if you're a woman and you report something, you can get sued. Then is there a tendency to have women now have another thing? I think Chuck brought this up a little while ago, to discourage them from reporting cases. Now, you guys know I say this probably almost every show. I'm a dad. Between my wife and I got 4 daughters and I got 5 sisters. And I was raised by a single mom for the majority of my life. And so I have a keen connection to women. And I've heard things from my sisters, unfortunately, that have happened to them in their life that they didn't tell anybody. And, as a man, you guys, husbands and fathers, and, part of why we're all on the show together is because we have that commonality. And the number one job of a husband or a father is to what? Protect your wife and protect your kids. And so when you see somebody that you love and care about has been injured, you want to protect them. You want to go out and destroy somebody for hurting your kids. Or, in my case, my sisters, I was a big brother. So if anybody did anything to my sisters, I wanted to hurt them. And we know that, there are women who go through things like this that don't report it. They don't say anything. They don't tell anybody because they don't think anybody's going to believe them. They're convinced that people will think it was their fault. If they have any kind of behavior in their past that, like a Michael Irving, where they might have been, considered promiscuous, that everybody's gonna say, oh, you just a hoe anyway, and that's why.
So Greg, let me ask you, what?
Can I finish my point? Before you ask me,
My point
is just this: it's a complex, complicated issue. The whole thing of false accusations, and especially in the black man, a white woman, and it's believed just because that's always been a taboo subject. But then there's also if we go far on the other side of, discouraging women for, reporting things like that, are we doing harm and disservice to them? So I think, this is an important case. And, things like this are things that we should be talking about and we should be discussing. And so there's the whole race side and there's the whole, sexism or, women's rights side. So I think both of them, have a lot of validity and things we should be talking about.
Yeah, I apologize for cutting you off, but the reason why I was trying to is because you hit on a point, on a question that kind of popped in my head. How can we get a balance, right? How do we hold women accountable, but yet still give them a safe place or give them a safe mindset to be able to still come out and report, when things are actually happening, because we all know women that things have happened to also. And we also, know that there is instances of certain women, using it for their own personal, gains, whatever they're trying to achieve, with not telling the truth. So how do you give that woman that safe space?
I think on both sides, we have to allow all the evidence, all the information, every side, come into every situation unbiased, come into every situation without snapping to judgment, and allowing all the information to come out, all the information to be presented, and then go through it. And, our court system is supposed to be, innocent till proven guilty, but with a preponderance of the evidence is where we're supposed to make judges and judge the situation and make decisions. We don't look at it because it was a black man, and black men are more disposed to violence and rape and all of that. And again, that goes back to the media painting that picture all the time. Every time you turn on the news, they show black offenders and they show white victims. So it's not just that they're trying to paint black people in a bad light. They're trying to make white folks afraid of black people. It's kind of how the media does it. So we have to try to remove that out of it, which is tough because people come in as a sort of a blank sheet, but then they get, told these stories over and over. But again, not jumping to judgment because it's a black male, but then at the same time, allowing women to tell their story, present what's happened, being caring, being, I guess, not trying to accuse the victim. Because I think what happens a lot of times is when someone has been the victim of a crime, a lot of times they become the person that we dig in on and we look at their history instead of just looking at the situation. It doesn't matter if I was and this is where I'm going to contradict something I said earlier. Michael Irving is being judged because of what he's done in the past. but really what he's done in the past doesn't have a one iota of meaning on what he's being accused of this time. And that's reality. So every case, we're not looking into the victim, we're looking into the facts that are presented, and then being reasonable when we're investigating those, and let the facts of this particular case and incident, not who the individual is, decide whether or not this is something that we can reasonably say actually happened.
I feel and Greg, yeah, I agree with pretty much almost all of that. I'm gonna say what I can say is that I do not know the mind of a woman. So, and unlike what other people believe, I believe men and women are different. I believe we think differently. I think we're different emotionally. I think we're different on the inside, and our minds, the whole thing. So when it's hard for me to fathom, just being a man from my point of view, not saying something when this person does something physically abusive to you, whether that's sexually or any sense of that word, that in any matter, And so, but a lot of women feel like they shouldn't and they can't. And I feel like that's something that we need to go back to encouraging. We need to encourage and empower young women to speak up, to say things. And here's what we really need to do. Above all things, we need to define the vocabulary around this stuff. Like all of a sudden, I remember when I was little, I would hear the word rape. Then as I gotten older, I've heard sexual assault. And I'm like, well, what the hell does sexual assault mean? Because that can mean anything. Mm-hmm. And so sexual assault could be verbal. It could be a touch on the behind. It could be a hug that's too long. Like, we need to really define these terms, because when we define these terms, then we empower people to say, hey, that was not right what that person did. That was XYZ. And I know sometimes there, is people want to leave it vague because they don't want to leave stuff out, but I feel like we have to. We have to make these definitions like real definitions, because people are getting to the point where there's accusations being made, and then people are walking away feeling like, was I just assaulted? Well, you should know if you were assaulted or not, and as a man, you're walking up like, hey, what can I do? What can I do? What can I not do? Is this conversation, is this is a colleague? Can I give her a hug? Can I not give her a hug? Can I say, you look nice today, or can I not? You know what I'm saying? Like, these things have to be defined. And I feel like our justice system is afraid to. I feel like our corporate entities and workforces are afraid to. I feel like there are certain taboos now. There's double standards that I think are not fair. They're not right. I don't believe that Ide Udoka his name was dragged through the mud, and the person that he had the affair was not. And I understand there was a hierarchy in their organization, and the person that had the most stature is supposedly wrong, but these are two consenting adults also. So all these matters come into hand. Like, it's all around the world. The workforce is filled with women, unlike 30, 40 years ago. Like, women are doing all the jobs that men are doing. We're in constant contact with each other. There needs to be some new rules to this game, to what's going on. There needs to be some definitions behind these things. And I think it would empower women to come out and say when something is happening, and we should encourage that.
Awesome. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Fellas, man, I think that was an important conversation. Not only was it important, it was insightful, and I'm sure everybody else agrees with me when I say I appreciate you guys for being so candid with that conversation. People, please do us a big favor. Like and subscribe and comment. Make sure that you do that for us as we are trying to build our platform, and it'd be much appreciated if you guys would do that for us. As you watch, if you continue to hear this hear this insightful conversation that these three super intelligent young men have for you guys, please, please, please like, comment, and subscribe. You guys have a good week. We'll see you next week. Deuces.